Imagine an ocean where the largest hunter is not a shark. It is not a dinosaur either. It is a marine reptile. A giant lizard relative that has left the land so completely that its limbs have become paddles. Its tail has become a powerful engine, and its skull has become a weapon built for grabbing, crushing, and tearing prey in the dark water of the late Cretaceous. This animal is Mosasaurus. Most people know the name because of Jurassic World. In that movie universe, Mosasaurus is presented like the ultimate sea monster, a stadium-sized predator rising from a lagoon, swallowing sharks, leaping out of the water, and later dragging enormous creatures into the deep. The image is unforgettable. It is also the reason many people think Mosasaurus was a dinosaur, or that it was impossibly huge, or that it belonged in the same world as Megalodon. The real animal is more interesting than the movie monster. Mosasaurus was not a dinosaur. It was not a fish. It was not a whale. It was not a prehistoric shark. It belonged to a group of extinct marine reptiles called mosasaurs, close relatives of living lizards and snakes. Dinosaurs belong to a different branch of reptiles, the archosaurs, which also includes crocodilians and birds. Mosasaurus lived in the same broad age as the last non-avian dinosaurs, near the end of the Cretaceous period. But it was not one of them. That distinction matters because it changes the whole story. Mosasaurus was not a land dinosaur that somehow decided to swim. It was part of a separate reptile experiment, one in which lizard-like ancestors returned to the sea and became some of the most successful predators in the world's oceans. By the late Cretaceous, mosasaurs had spread across marine ecosystems from shallow inland seas to open coastal waters. They were not background creatures. In many places, they were among the top predators of the marine world. And the ocean they ruled was not empty blue water. The Cretaceous seas were crowded, dangerous, and strange. Ammonites drifted and swam through the water in coiled shells. Bony fish moved in schools. Sharks were already important predators. Sea turtles cruised through warm waters. Plesiosaurs and other marine reptiles shared the same broad marine world. Large carcasses sank into darkness. Smaller animals hid in reefs, coasts, and open water food webs. Above, pterosaurs crossed the air. On land, tyrannosaurs, ceratopsians, hadrosaurs, and titanosaurs lived their own dramas. But below the surface, another version of the age of reptiles was unfolding, and Mosasaurus belonged to that version. To understand it, we have to strip away the monster image and rebuild the animal from evidence. The genus Mosasaurus is known from late Cretaceous marine deposits, especially from Europe and North America. Its name comes from the Meuse River area near Maastricht in the Netherlands, where early fossils helped shape the history of paleontology. In fact, mosasaur fossils were among the first great prehistoric reptile remains to force scientists to rethink Earth's past. Long before dinosaurs became cultural icons, the skulls of giant marine reptiles were already unsettling people's idea of a young, fixed, familiar world. Mosasaurus helped open a door into deep time. The largest species, Mosasaurus hoffmanni, was a genuinely huge animal. Traditional estimates often place the biggest individuals around 15 to 17 meters long, roughly 50 to 56 feet. Some newer discussions suggest that certain older estimates may be too high, and that many individuals were probably closer to about 12 or 13 meters, depending on which specimen and method are used. The safest way to say it is this: Mosasaurus was one of the largest mosasaurs, but the movie version was exaggerated far beyond what the fossils support. That does not make the real animal small. A 12-meter marine reptile with a massive skull, powerful jaws, conical teeth, and a muscular tail is already terrifying enough. We do not need to turn it into a whale-sized fantasy beast. Its real scale belongs to the world of large apex predators, not impossible monsters. A real mosasaurus would have moved differently from the old, outdated image of a sea serpent dragging itself through the water. Modern reconstructions of mosasaurs show streamlined bodies, paddle-like limbs, and powerful tails. Earlier mosasaurs may have looked more lizard-like, but later forms became increasingly specialized for swimming. Their tails were not simply long trailing ropes. Fossil evidence from related mosasaurs shows that some had a downward bend at the end of the spine supporting a tail fluke, somewhat like a shark-like propulsion system, though not identical to sharks. This tells us that mosasaurs were active swimmers, not clumsy reptiles floating around waiting for prey to bump into them. The limbs were not legs anymore in the ordinary land animal sense. They were paddles used for steering, stabilizing, and maneuvering. The main forward thrust likely came from the body and tail. Imagine not a crocodile with flippers and not a whale, but a long-bodied marine reptile with a deepening tail stroke, a head full of teeth, and a body shaped by millions of years of life in water. The skull is one of the most important parts of the story. Mosasaurus had a large head and strong jaws. Its teeth were not built for chewing like mammal teeth. They were built for seizing and holding prey. Mosasaurus also had additional teeth on the roof of the mouth, common among many reptiles, helping move captured prey backward. Some mosasaurs had more delicate teeth for smaller slippery prey, while others had crushing teeth for hard-shelled animals. Mosasaurus itself seems to have been built for large prey and powerful bites. It was not a filter feeder, not a gentle grazer, and not a passive scavenger alone. It was an active carnivore. What did it eat? The honest answer is that its diet likely varied by species, size, age, location, and opportunity. Fossils and related mosasaur evidence show that mosasaurs as a group ate fish, ammonites, turtles, birds, pterosaurs, other marine reptiles, and even other mosasaurs. Bite marks, stomach contents in some mosasaur fossils, and tooth shape all show a diverse predatory world. Mosasaurus was large enough to take substantial prey, but we should avoid imagining every meal as a cinematic battle with another giant. Most predators do not spend their lives fighting the biggest possible enemy. They eat what they can catch efficiently. A top predator survives by balancing risk and reward. A real Mosasaurus may have attacked large fish, smaller marine reptiles, turtles, and vulnerable animals in its environment. It may also have scavenged when the opportunity appeared. A dead animal in the ocean is a resource, and large predators rarely ignore free calories. But scavenging does not mean it was weak. Modern apex predators often hunt and scavenge. The ancient ocean was no different in that basic logic. One thing we should not do is pair Mosasaurus with Megalodon in the same scene. They did not live at the same time. Mosasaurus lived in the late Cretaceous and disappeared at the end Cretaceous mass extinction about 66 million years ago, the same extinction event that ended the non-avian dinosaurs. Megalodon evolved much later in the Cenozoic, millions of years after Mosasaurus was gone. So any Mosasaurus versus Megalodon battle is pure fantasy. It may work as internet entertainment, but it is not paleontology. That timeline is important because it helps us see Mosasaurus in its real world. Mosasaurus lived during the final act of the Mesozoic. The continents were different. Sea levels were high in many periods of the Cretaceous, creating broad, shallow seas across parts of the world. North America, for example, had the Western Interior Seaway, a great marine corridor that split the continent for long stretches of time. Europe was a broken archipelago of islands and shallow seas. Marine reptiles moved through warm waters rich with prey. The dinosaur age was not just happening on land. It was happening beneath the waves, too. In those seas, Mosasaurs rose relatively late compared with some earlier marine reptile groups. Ichthyosaurs had dominated many earlier Mesozoic oceans, but declined and vanished before the end of the Cretaceous. Plesiosaurs remained important, but mosasaurs expanded dramatically. Their rise shows how marine ecosystems can be reshaped when new predators exploit opportunity. By the late Cretaceous, mosasaurs had diversified into different sizes and feeding styles. Some were sleek hunters, some specialized in crushing prey. Some were enormous apex predators. Mosasaurus was part of this final great mosasaur radiation. How did reptiles take over the seas? Not by one single event. The Mesozoic saw multiple reptile groups invade marine habitats independently. Ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, marine crocodile relatives, sea turtles, and mosasaurs all represent different evolutionary experiments. Land-living reptiles repeatedly returned to water because oceans offered food, space, and ecological opportunity. But entering the sea required major changes. Limbs had to become paddles, bodies had to handle swimming, reproduction had to adapt, senses had to work underwater, and feeding had to shift to marine prey. Mosasaurs were part of the squamate branch, the reptile group that includes living lizards and snakes. Their ancestors were probably semi-aquatic or coastal lizard-like animals. Over time, some lineages became more specialized for life in the sea. The transformation was not instant. It was a long evolutionary process, and the fossil record preserves stages of increasing aquatic adaptation. By the time Mosasaurus appeared, the group had produced animals that were fully committed to marine life. One of the most fascinating questions is whether mosasaurs gave birth to live young. Evidence from mosasaur fossils strongly suggests that at least some mosasaurs were viviparous, meaning they gave birth to live young rather than coming ashore to lay eggs like sea turtles. That makes sense for fully marine animals, with paddle limbs poorly suited for moving on land. If Mosasaurus was similar, it would have lived its entire life in the water. It would have been born in the sea, hunted in the sea, grown in the sea, and died in the sea. That image makes Mosasaurus feel less like a monster and more like a complete marine animal. It had to navigate light, pressure, currents, prey movement, and competition. It had to breathe air, so it still needed to surface. It was not a fish. It could not stay underwater forever. Like whales, sea turtles, and other air-breathing marine animals, it would have lived between two worlds, physically in the ocean, but tied to the surface by breath. A hunting mosasaurus may have moved through dim water, then risen toward light, or patrolled near productive zones where prey gathered. We should not pretend we know every hunting strategy, but we can say its anatomy points to an active predator adapted for marine pursuit and ambush. The deep ocean feeling around Mosasaurus comes partly from scale, but also from atmosphere. The late Cretaceous sea was not the friendly blue aquarium of a tourist brochure. It was a layered environment where visibility could change quickly, where large predators might appear from below or behind, where ammonite shells drifted through water, where fish schools turned like flashes of metal, and where dead animals could attract scavengers from darkness. A huge mosasaur did not need to roar to be frightening. Its presence alone would have changed the behavior of everything around it. Prey animals would not have experienced it as a movie monster. They would have experienced a pressure wave, a sudden movement, a shadow, a jawline appearing too close, teeth closing, and then darkness. That is the natural history version of fear. It is quieter than cinema and much more believable. Now, why did Jurassic World make Mosasaurus so gigantic? Part of the answer is simple. Movies need spectacle. Jurassic World introduced a fully operating dinosaur theme park, and the Mosasaur Lagoon was designed as a showpiece. The filmmakers needed an animal big enough to shock audiences who had already seen Tyrannosaurus, velociraptors, and genetically engineered hybrids. A real large Mosasaurus would still be impressive, but cinema often scales prehistoric animals up to match emotional impact. The movie Mosasaur became less of an animal and more of a mythic attraction, a living sea monster built for awe. There is also a visual problem. Water reduces scale. A 12-meter animal underwater can look smaller if the shot does not give clear reference points. Movies exaggerate size because the audience needs to feel the creature instantly. Put a shark above the pool, show a gigantic head rising, and the viewer understands the message. This is the ocean's nightmare. It is effective cinema. It is not accurate paleontology. The danger is that movie images can overwrite scientific reality. Many viewers leave with the idea that Mosasaurus was a dinosaur, that it was larger than almost any real marine predator, and that it belongs in monster battle scenarios with animals from entirely different time periods. A good documentary has to undo that without simply mocking the movie. Jurassic World made Mosasaurus famous. That fame can be useful if it leads people toward real science. The goal is not to say the movie is bad. The goal is to say the real animal is different and the real story is better. Because it is, the real Mosasaurus sits inside one of the most important ecological transitions of the Mesozoic oceans. It represents the late success of mosasaurs before the end Cretaceous extinction. It shows how squamate reptiles, relatives of living lizards and snakes, became marine apex predators. It helps us understand how oceans can be ruled by animals very different from modern whales or sharks. And it reminds us that the age of dinosaurs was also an age of marine reptiles, even if those animals were not dinosaurs themselves. The phrase sea monster can be useful if we understand it carefully. Mosasaurus was not a monster in the supernatural sense. It was not evil, not oversized for drama, not a myth that somehow came alive. It was a real animal doing what large carnivores do: finding food, avoiding injury, reproducing, growing, competing, and dying. But from a human perspective, especially if a person could somehow enter its waters, it would absolutely feel monstrous. A head longer than a human body, rows of teeth, a muscular tail, and an ocean full of limited visibility would be enough to turn science into terror. That is the balance this topic needs. Awe without fantasy. Mosasaurus was not alone in its world. Mosasaur diversity was enormous by the end of the Cretaceous. Tylosaurus, Platecarpus, Prognathodon globidans, and many others show the range of the group. Some forms were long and streamlined. Some had crushing teeth. Some likely specialized in different prey. This variety tells us that mosasaurs were not one generic sea lizard design. They were an evolutionary radiation, filling multiple roles across marine ecosystems. Mosasaurus itself is often treated as the representative of all mosasaurs, but that can be misleading. It is a genus within a broader family. The public name becomes famous, then stands in for the whole group. That is similar to how Tyrannosaurus often stands in for all theropods, or how Velociraptor in movies stands in for a broader idea of raptors. But real paleontology is more detailed. Mosasaurus was one branch of a larger mosasaur story. That larger story begins with small to medium coastal predators and ends, before extinction, with highly adapted marine hunters spread across the globe. Fossils have been found on many continents. Their distribution reflects both ancient ecology and modern geology. Marine sediments preserve them in places that were once covered by seas. Their remains appear in chalk, shale, limestone, and other marine rocks. When we find a mosasaur fossil far inland today, that is often because the land was underwater during the Cretaceous. A fossil skull in Kansas, Belgium, Morocco, or the Netherlands is not misplaced. The ocean moved. The continents changed. The fossil is a message from a vanished sea. This is one of the most powerful things Mosasaurus can teach. The map of Earth is temporary. Places that are dry land now were once seafloor. Places far from the coast once held marine reptiles. The Cretaceous world was not simply our world with dinosaurs added. It was a different planet in motion, with different coastlines, climates, sea levels, and ecosystems. Mosasaurus forces us to imagine those ancient seas not as empty spaces around dinosaur continents, but as full worlds in their own right. That matters because popular dinosaur media often makes land the main stage. Tyrannosaurus hunts on land. Triceratops grazes on land. Sauropods walk across floodplains. Raptors run through forests. The ocean becomes a side attraction, a pool for one giant monster. But in the late Cretaceous, the marine world was just as complex as the terrestrial one. Food webs connected plankton, fish, ammonites, reptiles, sharks, and scavengers. Evolution was happening there at full intensity. Extinction would strike there too. When the asteroid impact and its aftermath ended the Cretaceous, mosasaurs disappeared along with non-avian dinosaurs, pterosaurs, ammonites, and many marine organisms. The extinction did not just remove land giants. It shattered ocean ecosystems. Mosasaurus belonged to that final world, the last chapter before a global reset. That gives it a special place in deep time. It was not an ancient ancestor of whales. It was not a survivor into the age of mammals. It was part of a lost reptile ocean that ended abruptly at the boundary. This is also why pairing Mosasaurus with modern-like whales or megalodon can confuse people. Whales evolved later from land mammals. Megalodon lived later in Cenozoic oceans. Mosasaurus belongs to the Cretaceous, to a pre-mammal-dominated marine world. Its competitors, prey, and ecological neighbors were different. When we keep the timeline straight, the animal becomes more real. It stops being a generic sea monster and becomes part of a specific historical ocean. How large was it really? Let us stay cautious. The largest named species, Mosasaurus hoffmanii, is often estimated in the range of roughly 12 to 17 meters, depending on material and method. Some popular sources use the upper end, about 17 meters. Some recent reassessments suggest more conservative lengths for certain specimens. The full body is not known from a perfect complete skeleton, so estimates rely on comparisons with related animals in skull or jaw proportions. A science documentary should say that Mosasaurus was huge, likely among the largest mosasaurs, but should not pretend we can give one exact movie poster number for every individual. This caution does not reduce the drama. In fact, it increases credibility. The real animal was likely comparable in length to a large bus or a very large whale shark in some estimates, though shaped very differently. Its skull alone could be enormous. Its jaws were lined with teeth suited to gripping prey. Its body was long and muscular. Even a conservative estimate gives us a predator that would dominate most modern marine imaginations. It does not need to be 40 meters long. Reality is already enough. Mosasaurus also had sensory abilities, but this is another place where careful wording matters. Skull shape, eye placement, and comparisons with other reptiles can suggest parts of how it may have experienced the world. But no fossil can give us a complete sensory life. Mosasaurs likely used vision and chemical cues, as many predators do. Some researchers have discussed forked tongue possibilities in mosasaurs based on squamate anatomy. But how exactly Mosasaurus detected prey in every situation remains uncertain. It lived in water, and successful marine predators often use multiple senses. Beyond that, we should not invent. The same caution applies to social behavior. We do not know whether Mosasaurus was solitary most of the time, gathered in certain areas, tolerated others near carcasses, or showed complex social interactions. Modern large marine predators vary widely in behavior. Fossils rarely preserve social life clearly, unless trackways, bone beds, or repeated associations provide evidence. So the safest documentary choice is to focus on ecology rather than imagined family scenes. Mosasaurus did not need a Hollywood family drama to be compelling. Its teeth and jaws are enough to tell us it was dangerous. Its size is enough to tell us it had few threats as an adult. Its fossil context is enough to place it in late Cretaceous seas. Its evolutionary relationships are enough to show that marine reptiles had taken paths far from the dinosaurs on land. The known facts already build a strong story. There is another reason Mosasaurus became famous. It looks like what people expect a sea monster to be. Long body, huge jaws, reptilian skull, deep water, ancient age. Sharks feel familiar because they are still with us. Whales feel familiar because they are living mammals. Mosasaurus feels alien because it belongs to a vanished category. A giant predatory marine reptile from the world before the asteroid. It is close enough to real animals to be believable, and far enough from modern life to feel otherworldly. That combination is powerful, but it also makes misinformation easy. Sea monster becomes dinosaur. Large becomes impossible. Cretaceous predator becomes megalodon rival. Movie creature becomes scientific reconstruction. The job of a good script is to keep the wonder while correcting the map. So the simplest correction is this. Mosasaurus was not a dinosaur. It was a mosasaur, a marine squamate reptile related to lizards and snakes. It lived in the late Cretaceous, not the Jurassic, despite the franchise title. It did not live with Megalodon. It was large, but not the absurdly oversized lagoon monster of Jurassic World. It was one of the great marine predators of its time, and that is more than impressive enough. Now let us return to the sea. Imagine a warm late Cretaceous coastal waterway. The surface is bright, but below it the light breaks apart into bands. Suspended particles make the distance hazy. Fish turn in coordinated flashes. A turtle moves slowly, heavy and armored. An ammonite hangs in the water, shell rotating slightly as it adjusts its position. Farther away, a smaller marine reptile moves near open water. Then the fish scatter. Something large is approaching, not with the frantic motion of a movie attack, but with the economy of an animal built to move through water efficiently. A head appears first, then the long body, then the powerful tail. It is not roaring, it is hunting. The fear comes from silence. Underwater, there is no dramatic soundtrack. There is pressure, movement, light, vibration, and the sudden closing of distance. Mosasaurus would not need to thrash endlessly. A predator this large would use timing. It would close in on prey that made mistakes, prey that was injured, prey that was isolated, prey that was small enough to overpower, or prey that could be attacked from a favorable angle. Large predators are not reckless if they can avoid it. Injury is costly. A broken jaw, damaged eye, or infected wound could be fatal. Even the apex predator has to survive the consequences of its own violence. This makes ancient ocean ecology more interesting than a monster fight. It is not about who beats whom in a fantasy arena. It is about energy, risk, opportunity, and adaptation. A mosasaur eating ammonites would face shell and shape. A mosasaur attacking fish would need speed and precision. A mosasaur taking another reptile would face struggle and danger. A carcass would attract scavengers. Juvenile mosasaurs would face predators of their own. Different sizes and species would occupy different niches. The ocean was not a ladder with one animal at the top doing whatever it wanted. It was a web, and even the top predator lived inside that web. The rise of mosasaurs also tells us that marine ecosystems are dynamic. When one group declines or disappears, ecological space can open. Mosasaurs took advantage of conditions in the Cretaceous seas, diversifying into forms that ranged from moderate predators to giants. This is evolution not as a straight line, but as a branching set of experiments. Land reptiles enter water, become better swimmers, split into multiple lineages, specialize, spread, dominate, and then vanish at a mass extinction. Their story is one of success and sudden loss. That sudden loss at the end of the Cretaceous is important. Mosasaurus was not gradually transformed into modern sea predators. It disappeared. Later oceans would be ruled by different animals: sharks, whales, seals, dolphins, and other marine mammals. The mosasaur world ended, and a different ocean eventually emerged. This makes Mosasaurus feel like a ghost from an alternate marine history, a reminder that the ocean's rulers have changed many times. The modern ocean does not contain anything exactly like it. Crocodiles are semi-aquatic archosaurs, not open-ocean mosasaurs. Monitor lizards are relatives on land, not giant marine apex predators. Whales are mammals, sharks are fish, sea turtles are reptiles, but not predators on the same model. Mosasaurus belongs to an extinct form of ocean life. That is why it captures attention. It fills a role that feels familiar, the giant marine predator, with a body plan that no longer exists. This is where the science becomes more powerful than the movie. A movie monster is built for one reaction: shock. A real extinct animal gives us more. It gives us evolution, anatomy, ecology, extinction, geology, and humility. It shows us that the living world we know is only one version of what life on Earth can become. There was a time when giant marine lizards, not whales, not orcas, not great white sharks, were among the most important predators in the sea. That world is gone, but fossils let us reconstruct enough of it to feel its reality. And that reconstruction began with bones. The early Mosasaurus fossils from the Maastricht area became famous in the history of science because they challenged older ideas about Earth and extinction. At first, people did not immediately understand what they were looking at. Was it a crocodile, a whale, a giant lizard? Over time, comparative anatomy showed that these remains belonged to an extinct marine reptile. This mattered enormously. Extinction itself had to become thinkable. Deep time had to become thinkable. Fossils were not just curiosities or dragon bones. They were evidence of vanished worlds. Mosasaurus therefore has two histories. One is biological, the animal's life in the Cretaceous sea. The other is scientific, the role its fossils played in the human discovery of extinction and prehistoric life. That makes it more than a movie creature. It is one of the animals that helped teach us that the world had once been radically different. When audiences see Mosasaurus in Jurassic World, they are seeing the latest layer of a cultural history that began long before cinema. Giant fossil skulls once unsettled naturalists. Museum specimens later fascinated the public. Scientific papers refined relationships and anatomy. Popular books turned mosasaurs into marine reptile icons. Then film transformed Mosasaurus into a blockbuster sea monster. Each layer changed the image. The challenge now is to connect the fame back to the science. That science tells a story that is dramatic without distortion. Mosasaurus was a giant marine squamate, a relative of lizards and snakes. It was part of a diverse mosasaur radiation in the late Cretaceous. It had a powerful skull, sharp teeth, paddle limbs, and a tail-adapted swimming body. It ate marine prey and may have occupied an apex predator role in many environments. It lived millions of years before Megalodon. It vanished at the end of the Cretaceous with many other marine and terrestrial groups. It was not a dinosaur, but it shared the planet with dinosaurs. That last line is often the best way to explain it. Not a dinosaur, but a neighbor of the dinosaur age. The distinction also helps explain why the title Jurassic World is scientifically tricky. Mosasaurus lived in the Cretaceous, not the Jurassic. Many animals in the Jurassic Park and Jurassic World franchise come from the Cretaceous as well, including Tyrannosaurus and Velociraptor. The word Jurassic is a brand, not a precise time label. That is fine for a movie title, but in science, time matters. The Jurassic and Cretaceous are different periods with different faunas and evolutionary histories. Mosasaurus belongs to the closing Cretaceous seas. Its disappearance was part of a global crisis. At the end Cretaceous boundary, an asteroid impact and its environmental aftermath caused massive disruption. On land, non-avian dinosaurs disappeared. In the ocean, ammonites vanished, many plankton groups suffered, and marine food webs were shaken. Mosasaurs did not survive. Their extinction shows that being an apex predator is not protection against planetary catastrophe. In fact, large predators can be especially vulnerable when food webs collapse. The ruler of one world can become impossible in the next. That is another reason Mosasaurus feels tragic as well as frightening. It was powerful but temporary. It dominated within a system that could still end. Its size, teeth, and marine adaptations did not matter when the base of the food web was disrupted and global environments changed. The sea monster was part of a world larger than itself, and when that world collapsed, it collapsed too. This is one of the deepest lessons of paleontology. No animal rules outside ecology. Mosasaurus may have been near the top of its food chain, but it depended on prey. Prey depended on smaller life. Smaller life depended on ocean chemistry, climate, sunlight, nutrients, and planetary stability. A mass extinction cuts through those connections. The individual predator is dramatic, but the ecosystem is the real stage. A good Mosasaurus documentary should therefore make the ocean feel alive. Not just one creature in blue darkness, but a Cretaceous marine world with layers: surface light, midwater pursuit, shelled ammonites, fish schools, turtles, sharks, plesiosaurs, smaller mosasaurs, decomposing carcasses, sediment drifting down. The predator's power makes sense only because the ecosystem exists. And then the asteroid arrives, not as a direct underwater explosion in every scene, but as a global boundary. Fire, dust, darkness, cooling, acid rain, food web disruption, and long-term ecological consequences. Mosasaurus does not need a final dramatic death scene to be meaningful. Its lineage disappears from the record. That absence is enough. The movie version gives us spectacle. The fossil version gives us rise, rule, and extinction. If we ask why people are so attracted to Mosasaurus, the answer is partly fear and partly perspective. Ocean predators are frightening because humans are land animals. We are not built for deep water. We cannot see far underwater. We move poorly there. The idea of a huge predator below us reaches into a very old fear, the unseen thing in the dark water. Mosasaurus intensifies that fear because it is ancient and extinct. It belongs to a sea that no human ever saw. It is familiar enough to imagine, alien enough to unsettle. But science turns fear into understanding. Once we understand Mosasaurus as a squamate, as a marine reptile, as part of late Cretaceous ecosystems, it becomes more than a nightmare. It becomes a way to learn how evolution explores possibilities. It becomes a way to understand how land animals return to water. It becomes a way to see that the ocean's rulers have changed across time. This is why the phrase real sea monster works best when used with respect. It captures the emotional truth of the animal's scale without abandoning scientific truth. Mosasaurus was real. It was marine. To us, it would look monstrous. But it was not a supernatural beast. It was biology at large scale. There is a quiet beauty in that. The bones of Mosasaurus do not exist to entertain us. But they do invite wonder. They are mineralized remains of a living body that once moved through warm seas. They survived burial, pressure, chemical change, geological time, erosion, discovery, excavation, and study. Each fossil is a long message from a world with no human witnesses. When we reconstruct Mosasaurus, we are not just making a scary animal. We are translating that message. Translation requires discipline. If the fossil says large, we should not translate it as impossibly huge. If it says marine reptile, we should not translate it as dinosaur. If it says late Cretaceous, we should not translate it into a megalodon fight. If it says predator, we should not turn every moment of its life into rage. The animal deserves better than exaggeration. The truth is enough. Mosasaurus was one of the great predators of the Cretaceous seas. It lived in a marine world that was not a side story to the dinosaurs on land, but a parallel kingdom of reptile evolution. It was related to lizards and snakes, yet transformed into something no living lizard resembles. It grew large enough to dominate ecosystems, yet vanished with them. It became famous through a movie, but its real story began in the rocks of Europe, in the early history of paleontology, and in the long evolutionary rise of mosasaurs. So when we see the Jurassic World lagoon creature, we can enjoy the image, but we should not stop there. The real Mosasaurus is not less interesting, because it is smaller than the movie version. It is more interesting because it fits into reality. It has a lineage. It has anatomy. It has ecology. It has a time period. It has extinction. It has scientific uncertainty. It has a fossil history that helped humans understand deep time. That is far more powerful than a monster in a tank. A tank is a spectacle. A Cretaceous sea is a world, and in that world, Mosasaurus was not performing for an audience. It was living at the edge of the Mesozoic, breathing air above waters filled with ammonites and fish, diving back into a sea where reptiles had become hunters, where jaws and tails and instincts decided survival, where the surface separated light from pressure, and where every living thing belonged to a food web that would one day collapse. That is the real sea monster. Not a dinosaur, not a shark, not a whale, not a fantasy. A giant marine squamate from a vanished ocean, famous because of a movie, but far more extraordinary because it was real. And if we slow down even further, the story becomes less about a single animal and more about a whole missing ocean. The Cretaceous Sea was not one uniform habitat. It had coastlines, reefs, open water, shelves, channels, shallow basins, deep zones, oxygen levels, currents, temperature changes, and local food webs. A Mosasaurus living near one coastline may not have lived exactly like a related mosasaur in another basin. Prey availability, water depth, competition, and climate would have shaped behavior. Even within a single species, juveniles and adults may have occupied different ecological spaces. A young mosasaur might have hunted smaller prey in safer environments, while a large adult could patrol wider waters and take larger animals. This matters because many people imagine prehistoric predators as if they were all permanent fighting machines. Real predators spend most of their lives not fighting, but surviving. Hunting is risky. Energy is limited. Injury matters. Reproduction matters. Avoiding unnecessary conflict matters. Even a large mosasaurus would have been part of ordinary biological rhythms. Feeding, resting, surfacing, healing, growing, avoiding hazards, and responding to the living world around it. That ordinary life is what makes it real. A monster only exists when the camera turns on. An animal exists all the time. The Cretaceous ocean would also have been a soundscape, but not in the way movies imagine. We do not know what Mosasaurus sounded like, and we should not invent a roar. Air-breathing marine animals can make sounds in different ways, but fossil bones cannot easily tell us the full acoustic life of an extinct animal. The safest image is not a roaring beast but a silent pressure in the water, movement, turbulence, sudden changes in fish behavior, the flash of a pale jaw, the pull of a body accelerating from below. The fear is not noise. The fear is arrival. Even the surface would have been part of the drama. Mosasaurus had to breathe. Every dive was temporary. Every hunt eventually had to end with a return to air. That simple fact keeps the animal connected to the upper world. It could vanish below, but not forever. It lived in water, yet depended on the sky. That is one of the strange things about marine reptiles and marine mammals alike. They conquer the sea without becoming fish. Their bodies adapt to water, but their lungs remember land. This connection to land becomes even more interesting when we remember mosasaur ancestry. Their deep ancestors were not ocean giants. Evolution did not begin with a monster. It began with reptiles closer to shore, with bodies that gradually became better at swimming, feeding, and reproducing in marine environments. Over time, some descendants became so aquatic that land was no longer part of their life. This is one of evolution's recurring themes: return. Animals move from water to land, and some later return to water, carrying old anatomy into a new world and reshaping it. Whales did this later. Mosasaurs did it earlier, by a different route, with different bodies and different evolutionary constraints. That is why comparing Mosasaurus to whales can be useful only up to a point. Both were large air-breathing marine animals, but one was a mammal, the other a reptile. One evolved in the Cenozoic, the other vanished at the end of the Cretaceous. One gave rise to living descendants. The other left no modern mosasaur line. Similar environments can produce similar pressures, but the histories remain distinct. The same is true for sharks. A large shark and a large mosasaur can both be apex marine predators, but their skeletons, reproduction, ancestry, and movement differ. Sharks are cartilaginous fish with a deep evolutionary history of their own. Mosasaurus was a reptile, breathing air, swimming with a body plan shaped from squamate ancestry. Calling everything a sea monster hides those differences. Science restores them. That restoration is what makes paleontology more than naming creatures. When a paleontologist studies Mosasaurus, the animal becomes a meeting point for anatomy, geology, evolution, ecology, and history. Teeth reveal feeding. Vertebrae reveal body form. Limb bones reveal locomotion. Sediment reveals environment. Associated fossils reveal community. Damage marks may reveal predation or scavenging. Bone chemistry may sometimes suggest aspects of growth or habitat. No single clue gives the whole animal, but together they build a more disciplined picture. That picture will keep changing. Mosasaurus has been studied for more than 2 centuries, and scientists still debate size estimates, species differences, anatomy, and ecology. That does not mean science is weak. It means science is alive. Fossils are limited evidence, and careful researchers revise models when better comparisons appear. A documentary should not fear uncertainty. It should show why uncertainty exists. When a movie shows an animal, it has to choose one design. Science often has to say, this part is well supported, this part is probable, this part is debated, and this part is unknown. That may sound less dramatic, but it is more honest. And honesty is what lets the real animal survive the hype. The real Mosasaurus does not need false certainty. It is enough to say that it was a huge late Cretaceous marine reptile. It was a squamate, related to lizards and snakes. It was not a dinosaur. It did not live with Megalodon. It likely occupied high positions in marine food webs. It had jaws and teeth suited for predation. It belonged to a world of ammonites, fish, sharks, turtles, and other marine reptiles. It disappeared in the same mass extinction that ended the non-avian dinosaurs. That is already a complete documentary premise. But there is one more reason this animal matters. It changes how we think about the dinosaur age. The public phrase age of dinosaurs often hides the sea. We imagine land first: forests, floodplains, volcanoes, herds, predators, eggs, nests. But the Mesozoic was also an age of marine reptiles. Ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, marine turtles, and mosasaurs created ocean worlds that were just as spectacular as anything happening on land. Some of the largest predators of the Mesozoic were not dinosaurs at all. They were part of this parallel marine story. Mosasaurus is a gateway into that story because it is famous enough to attract viewers and scientifically interesting enough to teach them something real. It can correct the dinosaur misconception. It can explain squamate evolution. It can introduce Cretaceous marine ecosystems. It can separate movie myth from fossil evidence. It can show that ancient oceans were not empty backgrounds. This is the best use of Jurassic World fame. A blockbuster image opens the door. Science walks through it. And once science walks through, the animal becomes more powerful, not less. The oversized movie creature shocks us for a few seconds. The real Mosasaurus, properly understood, changes the way we imagine an entire ocean. It makes the surface of the Cretaceous Sea feel dangerous. It makes deep time feel physical. It makes extinction feel like the end of a world that once had its own rulers. There is a moment in any good prehistoric story when the creature stops being a creature and becomes a symbol. For Mosasaurus, that symbol is the hidden ocean. It reminds us that history is not only written on land. It is written in seafloor sediments, in chalk deposits, in phosphate beds, in marine fossils pulled from places now far from the shore. It reminds us that Earth's past is layered under our feet and sometimes under our assumptions. The sea monster was real. But the greater monster, in a sense, is time. Time erased the seas, lifted the sediments, broke the bones, scattered the record, and left us only fragments. Time separated Mosasaurus from Megalodon by tens of millions of years. Time turned an apex predator into stone. Time made a living reptile into a museum specimen, then a movie icon, then a subject for scientific correction. To understand Mosasaurus is to understand that every fossil is both an animal and a message from time. That message is not simple. It says life can become enormous. It says evolution can return land animals to the sea. It says ecosystems can be ruled by creatures unlike anything alive today. It says power does not guarantee survival. It says extinction can end even the most successful predators. It says popular culture can make an animal famous, but science must make it accurate. So the next time someone asks, was Mosasaurus a dinosaur? The answer should be clear but not dismissive. No. It was not a dinosaur, it was something else, a marine reptile. A squamate, a relative of lizards and snakes. A late Cretaceous predator, a giant from a vanished ocean. An animal made famous by Jurassic World, but not created by it. A creature whose real history began long before cinema, long before humans, long before the modern ocean had the shape we know. And maybe that is the better ending. Not the image of a monster leaping from a tank, but the image of an ancient sea at dusk. Light fades across the surface. Below, shapes move in layers of blue and black. Fish scatter, an ammonite turns slowly. A turtle rises for air. Somewhere deeper, a long body moves with purpose. Not evil, not drama, just life. The animal surfaces, breathes, and sinks again into the Cretaceous water. For millions of years, creatures like this were part of the ocean's reality. Then they were gone. What remains are bones, rock, and the work of science. Enough to tell us that the real sea monster was not a dinosaur. Enough to tell us that it was better than the myth. Because myths only frighten us. Real animals teach us how strange the earth has actually been.